What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my main channel, so if you're interested in what if Naruto had Madara and the Kyubi sealed inside of him, or what if Naruto was a low born in Westeros and became king, go check out my main channel. And if you're interested in what if Naruto was a assassin in Westeros, or what if Naruto was trained by a Sith Lord, go check out my third channel. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Hokage's office. The Hokage will see you now, Maruyama-san, the secretary said, smiling politely. The Kumo ninja barely acknowledged her as he stepped past and pushed open the door to the Hokage's office. As one of the senior-most ninja in Kumo, he had of course been in the Raikage's office on many occasions, and he had always been curious what the other Kage's offices were like. He was a little disappointed to find that the Hokage's office was actually very similar to that of the Raikage, a desk stacked with paperwork, pictures of previous Hokages hanging on the wall, along with one of Sarutobi himself taken when he was newly appointed Hokage, judging by the youthful look, and several chairs scattered throughout the room. The couch sitting to one side was different though. The Raikage kept a collection of weights in his office so that he could exercise and maintain his strength while working. Apparently the Hokage favored napping on the job. Katsuo thought derisively his evaluation of the office was interrupted when the old man sitting behind the desk looked up from his paperwork. Maruyama-san, I wasn't expecting you. I thought the Kumo delegation had already left earlier this morning, the Hokage said pleasantly. Katsuo felt another wave of disgust. The Hokage didn't even know when foreign ninja were present in his village. It appeared the skills of the so-called god of shinobi had dulled considerably. With age he kept his thoughts to himself. However, unfortunately one of the members of my delegation was missing when we awoke this morning. We waited to see if he would return on his own, but he is not. I am asking your permission and cooperation in searching the village to locate him, Katsuo said, gritting his teeth slightly. If he had his way, his fellow ninja would already be combing the village. However, even if the Hokage was a mere shadow of his former self, he had to remain polite. Kumo had a lot to gain from this alliance, and offending the old fool by stepping on his ninja's toes would erase all the progress they had made over the past week. Sarutobi blinked owlishly, looking surprised. Really, I wasn't aware that anyone had left your hotel since yesterday evening. Let me call my Jounin commander in and see what we can find out. Katsuo stifled his impatience as the Nara was called, shifting silently in place until he stepped into the room. Yes, Hokage-sama, Shikaku asked, bowing. Did anyone escort any of the Kumo delegation from the hotel last night? No, Hokage-sama, Shikaku said. Immediately the Hokage turned back to face Katsuo. Well, that seems odd. Are you sure he isn't in the hotel somewhere? Katsuo's knuckles popped as he clenched his fists, but he held back his anger. This senile old fool was wasting his time. Absolutely, Hokage-sama. Well, that doesn't seem right. Then did your ninja leave the hotel on his own? Katsuo's frustration got the better of him as he snapped off his reply. It would seem so, Hokage-sama. The transformation from senile old man to battle-hardened veteran ninja happened in an instant. Then your delegation has violated the conditions of your stay within Konoha. Your group will be escorted immediately to the gates of Konoha, and a message sent to the Raikage demanding compensation for this trespass. It is unfortunate that one of your ninja would jeopardize the negotiations for the treaty in such a manner, but I will leave the consequences of that up to your Raikage. Katsuo was reeling in shock from the change in the Hokage, even as he realized just how thoroughly their entire delegation had been played, probably from the moment they first walked into Konoha. A week spent with the kindly, slightly forgetful grandfather image had instilled a false sense of security and caused him to underestimate the old man, and now he had been lured into providing an admission of guilt out of his own mouth. He didn't know whether to admire their deception or curse himself for falling for it. As for your missing comrade, no one has turned up identifying themselves as affiliated with your group. However, we did make several arrests last night, and it's possible there was a mix-up of some sort and that he was one of them. If you will provide a name and description, we will see if we can find him for you. Anbu. As the Hokage finished speaking, two Anbu appeared behind him, each grabbing hold of his shoulder and arm. They did not apply excessive pressure or seek to cause discomfort, but they made it very clear that they could immobilize him at a moment's notice. Escort Maruyama-san to his team, then escort the entire group to the northern gate. 30 minutes later the Kumo ninja were waiting restlessly outside the gates of the village. Two Anbu squads had kept watch over them the entire time, and they were beginning to wonder how long the Hokage intended to keep them waiting. There was a small commotion near the gates, and Katsuo turned to see the Hokage and most of the clan heads from Konoha's council walking towards his group. They approached at a sedate pace, but Katsuo could see that their faces were tense and unfriendly, a stark contrast to their demeanor earlier in the week. Maruyama-san, how nice to see you again, the Hokage said. Now that Katsuo knew it was an act, he actually found the grandfatherly expression on the Hokage's face a little disturbing. We did manage to locate someone matching Kaido Miyazaki's description, but I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. It seems that Kaido broke into a clan compound and attempted to murder the child of one of our ninja clans. He was caught, but not before the child was gravely injured, the Hokage said, deliberately keeping the exact details vague. Katsuo's face paled as he listened to Sarutobi speak. This was bad, this was very bad. Kyumo was strong, but they could ill afford a war with Konoha, especially if the village as a whole underplayed their strength, as the Hokage had that the village, acknowledged as the strongest in the elemental nations, could actually be even stronger than they appeared to be. Worried him greatly. Even if the situation did not lead to war, the damage to the negotiations and Kyumo's potential alliance with Konoha would be considerable. He heard his fellow ninja tensing, and a couple even reached for weapons, and he barked a command for them to stand down. He kept his eyes on Sarutobi the whole time. The old man's face may be smiling and apologetic, but his eyes were sharp and watchful, almost eager. Katsuo shivered. He didn't doubt that part of the Hokage wanted them to attack whichever clan Kaido attacked, and he privately suspected that the Hyuga compound had been targeted. The Hokage and the clan heads were taking it very seriously. Katsuo licked his lips nervously before he spoke. Where's Kaido now? Well, that's some more bad news. Unfortunately, since Kaido did not identify himself as a Kyumo ninja, and did not have any identification on his person, he was taken to the interrogation department. It seems that he refused to talk, and I'm afraid that they got a little excited. Sarutobi gave a soft sigh. Kids these days just don't know when to stop, do they? He said, voice almost wistful. Katsuo felt Sarutobi's eyes boring into his own. The Hokage's tone may be light and conversational, but the underlying message was clear. Kaido had crossed a line and paid the price. It remained to be seen just what that price was. However, well, now that you know who he is, would you be willing to release him into our custody? I will personally see to it that the proper reparations are paid for his trespass, Katsuo offered. Instead of answering verbally, the Hokage snapped his fingers. Two Anbu appeared in a shunshin, dropped something on the ground in front of Katsuo, and vanished again. The Hokage's eyes never left Katsuo's, and Katsuo was almost afraid to look down. The retching sounds coming from behind him told him all he needed to know about Kaido's state. It appears there might be a small amount of permanent damage. Konoha ninja take a very dim view of anyone who attacks children, and that seems to have fed into their eagerness in the interrogation. Still, I just can't find it in myself to chastise them too severely. I feel much the same myself after all, the Hokage said, his tone still pleasant. Katsuo nodded slowly. I understand perfectly, Hokage-sama. Wonderful. I'm glad we had this little discussion. I will contact the Raikage soon to discuss our next steps, but I'm afraid, given the circumstances, that the negotiations will be on hold for now. Sarutobi said, his face changed into that chilling visage that made people remember just why he was known as one of the most powerful ninja to ever walk the elemental nations. Now get out of my village. Hokage's office. Inoichi Yamanaka and Ibiki Marino were waiting for the Hokage to return to discuss the results of their interrogation of Kaido Miyazaki. They had already confirmed that the other members of the delegation had not been involved at any point of the attack, but they had found out a great deal of useful information that merited the Hokage's attention. They were chatting about some of the more surprising bits of information Inoichi had managed to pull from Kaido's mind. They were also trying to avoid thinking about what they had done to the man. Interrogation could be an ugly business, but they usually avoided dealing permanent or debilitating damage, especially to another ninja. It was an unwritten rule among the villages to avoid that sort of thing. It helped keep the violence from spiraling out of control in times of peace and possibly leading up to another war. The Hokage's orders on this matter were intended to send a clear message to Kyumo that they had crossed the line. His earlier conversation with Maruyama underscored that point, while letting the Raikage know exactly why Konoha had gone that far. It was a calculated risk on their part. Kyumo wouldn't be happy and would likely demand reparations of their own for the treatment of their ninja, but they most likely wouldn't seek to retaliate otherwise. That the Hokage had left the rest of the delegation unmolested would help a great deal in lowering the tensions for all the physical damage Ibiki had done, though it was Inoichi's contribution that was perhaps the worst. After pulling all the memories he could from the Kyumo ninja, he had completely and irrevocably shattered the man's mind, leaving the body a soulless husk. In some ways it was a mercy, but Inoichi hated using his mind techniques like that. He was far more comfortable with his role as a mind healer, which was why he had left TNI in the first place. For this man, though, he had made an exception, and even discussed it with himself as he would do it again if someone ever threatened his family like Kaido had they snapped to attention when the Hokage entered the room. Sarutobi waved at them to relax as he settled into his chair with a tired sigh. His rest the previous night had been cut very short, and he had been kept busy dealing with the aftermath of the attack on the Yamanaka household. He was also eager to get through this meeting so he could finally visit Naruto in the hospital. Give me the most pressing information first, we'll deal with the rest another time, the Hokage commanded. Inoichi and Ibiki consulted briefly, and Inoichi stepped forward. Kaido was Kumo's foremost infiltrator, which explains how he was able to penetrate the security around the house with such ease. I was able to pull a great deal of information about the security of various villages and cities, including Kumo itself, from his mind. He also had 2 contacts within Konoha, a merchant and a waiter. We are prepared to take them into custody at any time. The Hokage thought for a moment. Not just yet. I want to report on what information they have provided and the likelihood that they could be used for disinformation before I make a decision there, he said. Finally understood, Hokage-sama. Moving on, Kaido actually overheard my conversation with Hayashi shortly after the council meeting broke for lunch a few days ago, which is how he originally learned of the party. He was able to gather additional details on his own and made his own plans for the attack. He intended to kidnap Hinata Hyuga, and possibly Sasuke Uchiha, and take them back to Kumo. He believed that doing so would cement his fame within Kumo forever, as well as greatly strengthening the village in the future when the bloodlines were firmly established. This appears to have been entirely his own idea. Kaido actually believed that the Raikage would be upset at his actions, but would forgive him and praise him if he was successful. Ibiki stepped forward next, motioning to the folder he held in his hands. We have compiled a list of Kaido's contacts throughout the elemental nations. We believe that if we act quickly we can eliminate or even subvert a substantial portion of Kumo's spy network. The Hokage nodded. Pleased. I will pass this information on to Jiraiya. He'll decide what to do with it from their excellent work, both of you, he said, then turned back to Inoichi. Were you able to get anything about his attack on your home? Inoichi shook his head. Unfortunately no, the memory leech jutsu targets long-term memory, and the events of last night were not included. We have sufficient information from Ino and the guards to put together a solid picture of what happened. The only question at this point is why Naruto was downstairs at all. He often has trouble sleeping, however, so it would not surprise me if he was simply looking for something to drink or heading to the library. The Hokage nodded thoughtfully. He paused as a thought occurred to him. Inoichi, did Naruto use any of the tailed beast's chakra last night? Inoichi blinked. No, actually he didn't, he replied, surprised. He hadn't noticed that detail in the frantic haze of the moment or the constant worry that followed. Ino said that Naruto shoved her out of the way, so it may be that he was more focused on protecting Ino than killing his attacker this time, which could perhaps have made the difference. It bodes well for his eventual recovery if his priorities have already shifted, though I'm still worried about how willing he is to put himself into harm's way. Grateful, of course, he added hurriedly. Naruto saved Ino's life last night, but I'm still worried about him. Ibiki snorted. If the kid keeps healing as fast as he has the last 2 times, I'm not sure you can really call it harm's way anymore. He's already survived 2 attacks that should have killed him with not even a scar to show for it. Lucky bastard, Ibiki finished muttering. Ibiki's face alone was heavily scarred, and the bandana he wore on his head covered an even worse sight. The Hokage frowned, turning a disapproving glare at Ibiki. He may heal quickly, but I'd much prefer he never get hurt at all, especially as young as he is. I am glad to hear that he and Ino are getting along as well as they have, and it gives me hope for the future that Naruto was willing to risk himself to save another. Still, he shouldn't have to make such decisions so young. The other ninja nodded in agreement, and they fell into a thoughtful silence. After a minute, Sarutobi cleared his throat and spoke. Well, unless there's something else that requires my immediate attention, I think it's time I paid a visit to our little hero, Sarutobi said, and then maybe I can get some damn sleep, he finished under his breath. Ibiki and Inoichi politely pretended not to have heard that last part. Konoha General Hospital. Kushu was not sure how to feel about last night's events. On the one hand, the best chance he'd had yet to find information on the current whereabouts of any of his brethren had been interrupted by Ino's appearance, and he was rather annoyed about that. On the other hand, simply knowing that a Kumo ninja had been around them at some point in the last month or so meant that Kumo likely was still keeping them captive. His research had already determined that Saika and Itsuzan were last sighted in the Land of Lightning fighting Kumo ninja, but that information was decades old. This was the first time he'd found information that wasn't years out of date, and it also confirmed that he would be able to track his brethren once he was close enough. In retrospect, it was unlikely he would have gotten anything useful out of the Kumo ninja anyway, and his spur-of-the-moment confrontation likely would have ended very badly if the guards had found him talking with the ninja. Some very awkward questions could have come up that even now he wasn't sure he could have answered. From that perspective, Ino's interruption could quite possibly have saved his life. At the very least, it kept suspicion off of him. So did he actually owe her something? His musings were interrupted When the door to his room slowly creaked open, stopping when just a small crack was visible, he could see blonde hair and a blue eye peeking through the gap. He cocked his head to the side curiously. "Ino-chan, what you are doing?" a voice in the hallway asked in exasperation. The door suddenly opened fully and Ino squeaked as she lost her balance and fell to the floor. She took a long moment to pick herself up, and even as she stood fully in the room, her gaze was focused firmly downward. Kiku placed a firm hand on Ino's back and guided her over to Naruto's bed. Kushu watched Ino curiously. She had yet to look straight at him since she entered the room, instead sending quick glances his way, then looking back down every now and then. Her body would tremble, and if he wasn't mistaken, her bottom lip was quivering. What in the world was she doing? "Ino-chan, what's wrong with you? You practically dragged me over here," Kiku asked, a little concerned. Ino had been desperate to make sure Naruto was alright, and she had not taken it well when she found out that Naruto wasn't allowed visitors. At first Kiku knew that Naruto had been in the ANBU hospital at the time, but the general population wasn't supposed to know that particular piece of information. Instead, the story was that he had gone to the normal hospital for treatment and had only been recently moved into a room that allowed visitors. In addition, the full extent of his wounds had been downplayed while his recovery time had been inflated considerably. When Ino had heard that Naruto was finally allowed visitors, she had almost bolted out the door by herself, even though she didn't actually know where the hospital was. The entire trip over she had pleaded with her mother to go faster, but once they actually arrived at Naruto's room, her demeanor completely changed. Now she seemed almost scared to be here. "Hey Ino-ne-chan, what's wrong? You didn't get hurt, did you?" Kushu asked. The humans would not be happy with him if he had injured her. That question seemed to break Ino's resolve, and she threw herself onto the bed as she burst into tears. Kushu patted her awkwardly as she clung to him. She was babbling as she cried, but he could pick out certain phrases that were repeated over and over. "I'm sorry, and please don't hate me." He understood what the problem was a little better then and knew the expected response. He unknowingly echoed Inoichi's earlier words as he rubbed her back and consoled her. "It's okay Ino-ne-chan, it's not your fault." It felt strange to realize how much the little human actually cared for him, and even stranger that he did not feel disgust at the thought his relationship with this human could not possibly compare to the millennia he had spent with the Bijou or the centuries with his own tribe. But his mind began to recall those distant days when the Bijou were newly born. Even then, none of the others would have dared worry for him. Even then, long before they had understood their own immortality, he had always been the most powerful. It was his job to worry about them. He could still remember how it felt to worry about the others, though the fear that these few beings, precious and familiar, could be taken from him, never to return. He could remember the paralyzing terror that he felt when it seemed that his own little brother had perished in the first war, and the joyous relief that had come when he survived. And despite himself, despite his anger at the humans who had sealed him and stolen his brethren from him, he found himself thinking that perhaps not all of them were enemies. Yamanaka residence main bedroom. "You should have seen them, Inoichi. It was the sweetest thing I'd ever seen in my life." Ino was bawling her heart out, and Naruto was hugging her for all he was worth, rocking her back and forth. "I swear he was even crying a bit himself," Kiku said. She sniffled a little bit and wiped her eyes. "Are you crying?" Inoichi asked teasingly. Kiku slapped him on the chest. "Yes, I'm crying, and you should be too. I know. It's only been a little more than a week, but I already feel like Naruto is part of the family." Ino absolutely adores him, and Naruto really seems to like it here. She cut herself off, looking a little embarrassed and unsure. Inoichi had a good guess as to what she'd been about to say, and he sat up and pulled her closer to him. "You've even thought of him as your own son," he finished quietly. Kiku stiffened, slightly worried. "How did you?" "Because I have too," he assured her when I saw him lying there in the hallway. It was just like when Ino broke her arm, worse, even that horrible helpless feeling, he said. Kiku relaxed into Inoichi's embrace. "Is that normal to feel like this so quickly?" Inoichi shrugged. "Probably not, but do you regret it? Do you feel like we should let Naruto live somewhere else?" "Absolutely not," Kiku said immediately. "Well, there you are." They lay there in silence for a while, thinking about all the changes Naruto had already brought to their life and the changes that would likely come in the future. Kiku spoke again after a while. "Inoichi, do you think you can really help Naruto?" she asked uncertainly. Inoichi held her tighter. "I will," he said, his voice full of conviction. "I will." Uchiha compound, clan head's residence, Fugaku, Uchiha's private office. "I trust that you have learned to be a little more creative in your solutions in the future." Shinji Udai Fugaku said. "Yes, Fugaku-sama," they answered. The two Uchiha, the same Uchiha whom Fugaku had called upon to clear up his little problem with the civilian counselors, were currently kneeling on the floor of his office. They held themselves stiffly, and their voices were tinged with pain, though they did not dare voice a complaint. Fugaku firmly believed that pain was the best motivator and had thoroughly beaten his lesson into their bodies over the last week. He was similar to the Hokage in this regard, though the Hokage took far less pleasure in administering the lessons and at least made sure that those being disciplined got some benefit from the experience. Fugaku Just focused on the pain. He had not been amused to learn that both Naoki and Harumi had died while falling downstairs. It seemed that Shinji and Yudai had decided to each perform a jinjutsu on one of their targets, but it had never occurred to them to coordinate their jinjutsu or to make sure that they took different approaches. Such laziness and lack of foresight did not speak well of their skills, nor did it reflect well upon the clan. As a whole, he dismissed them and sat back in his chair as they stood and slowly hobbled out of the room. He would need someone else for such work in the future, someone far more skilled and thoughtful, someone he could trust implicitly of course, but still someone who was capable of thinking for themselves. The first name to enter his mind was Itachi, but he dismissed it just as quickly. Itachi would be wasted on such tasks. No, Itachi was destined for ANBU and would give Fugaku his first source of information within the ranks of the Hokage's most trusted ninja. At Itachi's current rate of progress, he would likely make Chunin within the year, and recruitment into the ANBU program would follow quickly. It was entirely possible that Itachi could make ANBU captain within the next 5 years, destroying that Hatake brat's record. The Uchiha should be the best in all things, and Itachi was the perfect example of this. Sasuke, on the other hand, was not. Fugaku honestly didn't know where he had gone wrong. He had married a strong kunoichi from within the clan, the only female in his generation to completely master her Sharingan. Their first child had proven the strength of the Uchiha blood. Perfect scores in the academy graduation in a single year, a perfect mission record, and well on his way to fulfilling the service and mission requirements for Chunin. Sasuke, their second child, should have followed in his brother's footsteps. Instead, Sasuke was barely above average, a bitter disappointment. Useless. The Jinchuriki, on the other hand, was already being compared to Itachi. If it was in chakra or raw power, Fugaku would have chalked it up to the tailed beast sealed into the child, but no, it was his intelligence and learning speed that rivaled or even outstripped Itachi's. Coupled with the rate he could heal himself, the kid might even prove to be more powerful than Itachi if you left out the Sharingan. Of course, with the Sharingan it was no contest. Fugaku sighed and refocused on the task at hand, while the Hokage had been out dealing with the attack on the Yamanaka household and removing the Kumo ninja from Konoha. Fugaku had been scrambling to shore up his hold on the civilian side of the council. The civilians most likely to fill the now vacant seats on the council had proven difficult to sway until he promised them a few off-the-books missions from an Uchiha ninja in addition to the traditional perks provided by his police force. Once he had secured their votes, the next vote for the temporary ninja seats on the council would go his way, and he would have the majority of the votes on the council following his lead. From there, it was simply a matter of time until he was Hokage. Now he just needed a ninja capable of handling those missions while keeping it quiet, as Shinji and Yudai had proven unsuitable to continuing to work for him in that capacity. Fugaku drummed his fingers on his desk as he reviewed possible ninja for the jobs. It was so difficult finding good help these days. Meanwhile, Kurama compound, thank you for agreeing to return to active duty. Tetsuya-sama. Tetsuya nodded solemnly. The 60-year-old shinobi had been retired for nearly a decade now and had refused to return to active duty in the wake of the tailed beast's attack, instead focusing on managing clan affairs. This arrangement had allowed the younger members of the clan to perform more missions, and so had been permitted, though a few members of the clan resented him for it. The opportunity now before the Kurama clan was too important to ignore. However, for the sake of the clan, I could not do otherwise, he said. Murakumo, the current head of the Kurama clan, smiled. Yes, once Takao and Madoka graduate early next year, the Kurama clan will finally have the requisite numbers to obtain a permanent seat on the Konoha Council. The prestige alone will greatly increase our fortunes and further secure our place within Konoha. Unkai, Murakumo's brother, nodded in agreement. It's been galling to watch the Uchiha flaunt their status even when so many of their members barely know which end of the kunai to hold. It's about time the Kurama finally got a say in the direction of this village land of whirlpools. A tall, thin ninja wrapped in a cloak that obscured the ninja's entire body gave the courier ninja his fee and sent him on his way. The ninja waited until the courier was out of range before leaving the area, beginning the 30-minute trek back to shelter. Only once the ninja was inside and the door sealed did she dispel the henge that concealed her form. We've got another letter, the woman said, tearing open the envelope. Seeing the letter was encoded, she set to work deciphering the letter's contents. Another job already? Don't we have enough funds for now? Her companion, another woman, asked. She was currently working her way through her sword form, her body dripping with sweat as she flowed around the room, her blade flashing through the air with deadly grace and precision. Let's see. Oh, it's from. She cut off with a snarl, her face tightening with fury. Her hands began to shake as she continued to read the letter. What is it? The first woman thrust the letter towards her companion and stalked off to a corner. Her fists tightened and her knuckles cracked, but she stopped herself from lashing out at the wall. They couldn't afford to destroy the hideout they were in at the moment. After all, silence permeated the room for a long minute. Before the second woman dropped the letter letting it fall to the floor, Tsunade, she growled, unconsciously hefting her. Blade, tell me again why I can't just kill them all. I'm having a hard time remembering that myself right now. Kushina. They shared an angry glance, each wishing they had something to lash out against, something to distract themselves. Kushina was the first to break. What have they done to my son? She cried, falling to her knees. Tsunade hurried to her side, wrapping her in a hug. As the other woman wailed, she couldn't find anything to say. She also couldn't stop the little ball of fear that settled in her. Got a fear that said that even when they finally got Naruto back it might already be too late. Fugaku's private office. What do you mean they graduated early? Fugaku snarled. Both Madoka and Takao Kurama successfully passed the graduation test 2 years early and have already passed the second genin test with their squads. With Tetsuya Kurama's reactivation, the Kurama clan now have I know. Damn it, those pathetic little upstarts think they deserve to be a permanent clan on the council. Fugaku sneered. His expression soon turned pensive as things stood. The Kurama would get their seat and they would certainly not be voting Fugaku's way. This wasn't the first setback he'd suffered recently either. The Ogawa clan had been making waves in Konoha this past year. They were a relatively new ninja clan with strong civilian roots that had proven to be very effective in the field. Their connections with civilian council members were strong enough to secure one of the temporary seats despite Fugaku's wishes. And they too held no love for the Uchiha. The Ogawa seat Fugaku had let slide, if reluctantly, even if it made completely dominating the council less likely. He would still have the simple majority he needed to secure his election as Hokage, but the loss of another seat to the Kurama changed things considerably. Without that vote he would only have the 10 civilian votes and perhaps a single seat on the ninja side. The ANBU commander, the Jounin commander and the other 8 ninja seats would all certainly vote against him. The risk that he could lose the vote of the last remaining temporary seat or one of the civilian votes was far too high now that his advantage had dwindled to a single vote. Barely a month remained before the 5-year term ended, and now when he was so close to securing his ambition, everything was beginning to slip away from him. The Uchiha who had delivered the message wisely withdrew as Fugaku began to leak killing intent, shutting the door behind him. That was fortunate, as Fugaku would not have appreciated any witnesses to the tantrum he indulged in shortly thereafter. Several minutes later Fugaku collapsed in his chair, still fuming. The Kurama clan specialized in Genjutsu, and with the Sharingan's ability to detect such illusions, the Kurama's strongest power was absolutely useless. Fugaku by himself could probably take on most of their so-called ninja without even breaking a sweat. Even idiots like Yudai and Shinji could take out any of the Kurama at their leisure. The Kurama only just met the requirements to become a permanent clan anyway. If even one of their ninja retired or Fugaku suddenly shot to his feet, the answer was so simple and obvious it surprised him that it took this long to come up with it. It was also illegal and even treasonous, but that sort of thing had long ago ceased to matter to him. In his mind he already considered himself the next Hokage, and the Hokage often had to make difficult sacrifices for the good of the village. What did it matter if one insignificant genin died in an unfortunate training accident compared to the prosperity he would bring to the village once he was Hokage? It didn't matter at all. Same day Uchiha training grounds, Sasuke threw another punch at the log post that was sticking up out of the ground. His small fist and the meager power he could muster did not make the satisfying thunk the older ninja produced, but he persisted anyway. Itachi and Ai-san trained like this, so he would 2 another 10 punches and he would run another lap around the training field. His mother would be calling him home in 30 minutes and he wanted to get as much training as possible, and while he had the time he wanted to impress Itachi with his progress. When his older brother returned from his latest mission, Sasuke always got a warm glow of satisfaction when his mother and older brother praised his efforts, even if his progress paled before Itachi's own. He had also heard the other ninja children had started their own training regimens shortly after that incident, and he wanted to keep up with them as well. He wasn't certain if he could call them friends when he only saw them once or twice a month, but he always enjoyed the time he spent with them. No one ever compared him to Itachi then, and even Naruto, acknowledged by one and all as the strongest of their group, never made him feel weak or unwanted. They didn't care that he had yet to awaken his own Sharingan. Thoughts of gaining his Sharingan brought his brother's words to mind. The Sharingan is a tool, nothing more. It is the ninja that makes it dangerous or not. His father said something else entirely though, constantly reminding Sasuke that it is the Sharingan that sets the Uchiha above all other ninja. An Uchiha without a Sharingan is barely an Uchiha at all. Even as young as he was, Sasuke understood the underlying message. If he wanted his father's acknowledgement, he would have to awaken his own Sharingan. As Itachi had his mother said nothing On the matter, Sasuke wasn't sure what he himself thought, but he knew that whoever was right activating his Sharingan would make him stronger. Maybe then he could finally move closer to Itachi's level. Maybe then people would praise him as they praised Itachi and Naruto. Maybe then his father would look at him same day. Hokage's office, what is so important that you had to bring me back to work, Dragon? I'd actually managed to catch up on my paperwork early and was hoping to spend some time with my grandson, the Hokage said, visibly annoyed. My apologies, Hokage-sama, but the ANBU squads watching over the Uchiha compound reported some suspicious activity, and given the nature of that activity I thought it best to inform you immediately, Dragon said. Bong. The Hokage sighed, but settled into his chair. Alright, let's hear it. Around 6 this evening, Katsuro Uchiha, who as you know is Fugaku's newest Black Ops ninja, was called into Fugaku's office. Shortly thereafter he left the Uchiha compound and observed the training sessions of Takao and Madoka Kurama. He followed them home and spent nearly an hour observing the Kurama's security before returning to the Uchiha compound. Sarutobi's face was a mixture of fury and disbelief. He wouldn't, he growled. It appears that in fact he would. Dragon replied, I knew he had spent a lot of effort trying to lock up council votes, but to stoop that low, Sarutobi said, even for an Uchiha the man is despicable. Dragon spat. The ANBU surveillance on Fugaku over the last year and a half had proven most enlightening. Fugaku routinely bribed civilian counselors and took Black Ops jobs that did not meet the standards of village conduct set forth by the Hokage. It had actually come as a surprise, if a pleasant one, when they determined that Fugaku apparently only trusted a small subset of his clan with his personal agenda, a group that did not include his own wife. Do you have any idea when Katsuro will strike other than the obvious deadline of the council elections? No. Given Fugaku's pattern of arranging accidents for his victims, we can determine that Katsuro will most likely attempt something during a training session, although it is unknown how he plans to avoid the Jounin instructor. His interest in the Kurama security suggests he may try a more direct approach, although sabotaging the Genin's equipment is also possible. After waiting in silence for several minutes as the Hokage considered the information, Dragon volunteered an idea on how to handle the situation. We could arrest Fugaku now, the ANBU commander said. We've already gathered enough evidence to prove criminal activity. Even if we don't have anything to prove his more treasonous actions, we could, but the Uchiha would never stand for it, and the civilians would likely riot if their beloved chief of police was taken into custody. That's why I haven't acted before now. No, we need to catch him in the act. We need to catch Katsuro alive and get a confession out of him with attempted murder of a fellow ninja, especially a child freshly graduated from the academy. Even the civilians will abandon Fugaku. Hopefully the other Uchiha will back down at that point, but I'm not going to play games anymore. If Fugaku is ready to go this far, if the Uchiha still resist, they will be taken down, Sarutobi said firmly. I want ANBU shadowing Takao and Madoka at all times. I'll personally contact the Kurama and apprise them of the situation wherever and whenever Katsuro makes his move. We'll be ready. Understood, Hokage-sama, Dragon said, bowing again. Even through the distortion of the mask, the ANBU commander's voice carried equal measures of determination and eagerness. Time skip. A small tavern in the land of water. They've managed to keep it quiet so far, hoping that they can find him or that he'll turn up on his own, but the Mizukage has gone missing. Only his strict discipline, strong nerves, and sincere desire not to waste such expensive sake kept Jiraiya from spitting his drink all over the table. Missing? Like missing mean missing? I don't think so. They don't seem angry about it, just worried. Well shit, no kidding. Yagura is very popular, and the Kagaya in particular are not going to take it kindly if someone assassinated him. Course, it's kinda scary to think that someone could actually assassinate a Kage without some huge battle going down. Just goes to show even the best can be taken down. I guess. Jiraiya nodded in agreement, but inwardly his thoughts were heading in a very different direction. Yagura wasn't just a Kage, he was a Jinchuriki. Even if he didn't have the absurd healing Minato's kid did, he would heal faster than most, and poisons would have a hard time doing anything to him. He didn't rely on his larger chakra capacity to spam ninjutsu either. Yagura was a taijutsu specialist and an absolute nightmare with that hooked staff of his. If anything, ninjutsu was his backup skill. Basically, there wasn't a chance in hell someone took him out without a fight. Anything else? Jiraiya asked, already fishing around in his pockets for some coins to pay for the sake and the information. Some more freelance ninja groups have started cropping up lately. What, like the Sword and Hammer you never shut up about? Hey, those guys kick ass. Did you hear what they did over in the Land of Grass? Yeah, I know. Doesn't change the fact that they're probably missing Nin from somewhere anyway. What about the new groups? Well, there's the music note guys, they wear headbands like official Ninja, and I think they're trying to start up their own village. They're still small fry right now, but I hear they're willing to take the jobs most ninja won't touch. They mostly operate near the land of hot water. I remember those hot springs, and the ladies in them. Jiraiya said, a lecherous grin crossing his face. Speaking of, when's your next book coming out? Hey, you can't rush genius. It takes a lot of careful research to craft such perfect works of art, Jiraiya said indignantly, and that info is useless. I already heard about them 6 months ago. Wait, they're not the only ones. There's these guys in black cloaks with red clouds on them that have been popping up everywhere. They were looking around the land of water 2 weeks ago. Don't try to tell me you've heard about that before. Jiraiya frowned thoughtfully. He had heard of them, but nothing as fresh as that. He'd started getting reports of them through his network nearly 2 years ago, but the information was often months old by the time it reached him. You got descriptions? Did they take any jobs? Jiraiya pressed. His informant shifted uncomfortably. No, the cloaks and the straw hats was all anyone could say. They just wander around for a bit then leave. Then why are you so certain they're ninja? Because they scare the shit out of everyone without even trying. That's why. Damn it, that's the same thing everyone else said. So far these guys had been spotted in 9 different countries, but they had yet to actually do anything, and yet everyone took note of them and reported it. No names, no descriptions, no jobs taken, nothing. There really wasn't anything to report, and normally he wouldn't even waste his time with information that vague. So why did he get the feeling it was so important? Yamanaka residence. Ino was red-faced and sweaty, and her clothes were covered in dirt and leaves, but she paid her disheveled state no mind. She was focused on her current task, slowly but surely inching her way up a tree in her backyard using only her feet. The chakra exercise was incredibly difficult for her, but she persevered and was slowly but steadily making progress. Naruto was sitting on the ground nearby, surrounded by odd bits of black debris. He held a leaf on the back of his hand, and his brow was furrowed in concentration. After several seconds, he slowly turned his hand over so that the leaf and the back of his hand were facing the ground. Almost instantly the leaf caught fire, and he muttered a curse as the newest lump of ash settled onto the ground. He snatched up another leaf and began again. Ino's control slipped and she landed on the ground with a loud thump. She stood up with a small groan and rubbed her rear, muttering under her breath, "You better not let Kaha-san catch you." Saying that, Naruto said distractedly, Yeah, Ino replied. She eyed the tree for a moment but decided to take a break. Her reserves were running a little low anyway. She plopped down next to Naruto, not caring that she landed on several burnt leaves. "How's it going, little brother?" Naruto growled, a surprisingly animalistic sound issuing from his throat. "It's not." Ino leaned over and patted him on the head, rubbing her hand through his hair and messing it up even more than it already was. Even geniuses can't be great at everything. Besides, I'm sure you'll get it eventually. Naruto gave her a sour look before he turned his attention back to his newest leaf. Another few seconds and a fresh lump of ash hit the ground. "I take it you had similar problems with spontaneously combusting foliage." Ino stuck her tongue out at him, then sat back leaning on her hands. "No, but I don't have the chakra reserves of a jounin either. Why don't you try something a little bigger or heavier, or at least something less likely to catch on fire?" Ino suggested. Naruto shrugged. "Shizune-chan insists that I use leaves. She says using something heavy won't teach me the same skills using a leaf will." Ino pouted. She knew it was silly, but she still felt a little jealous whenever Naruto talked about Shizen. Naruto's borderline obsession with becoming a med-nin complemented Ino's own decision to follow her father's path in mind healing, but she felt sometimes like she was competing with the med-nin for Naruto's attention. It felt terribly selfish of her after everything Naruto had done for her, and she made sure to squash those instincts whenever they rose up, but the feeling was still there. "Well, why don't you try something in the middle then?" It had seemed like an obvious suggestion to her, even if she mostly offered it out of a desire to prove Shizen wrong, but Naruto's dumbstruck expression seemed to indicate otherwise. Kushu's troubles with human chakra control stemmed from the inescapable fact that despite the body he currently occupied, he was not human. His Yuki was the dominant force within the body, both in quantity and quality. Whenever he tried even this simplest of exercises, his Yuki would completely overwhelm the human chakra and produce unpredictable and often destructive results. He was currently attempting to completely isolate the human chakra from his Yuki and use only human chakra in the exercise, but that was proving nigh impossible. Always before, he had simply surrounded the human chakra with his Yuki and essentially carried it wherever it needed to go. Despite his presence in the body, he only had the most tenuous of connections with the chakra it contained. He could feel it and even move it about as it were his own Yuki to a limited extent, but once it was completely isolated from his Yuki, it became dormant again. Thus his current situation: if he used Yuki, the leaf burned. If he used just chakra nothing happened, but hearing Ino's suggestion had given him an idea for an entirely different approach, and he wondered why it had never occurred to him before. Rather than surrounding the chakra with Yuki, what if he attempted to blend the two energies together? A small amount of Yuki mixed into the chakra would theoretically increase the potency only slightly, but still allow him to control it, if not nearly as well as pure Yuki. From there the control, exercise, and eventually the incredible variety of human techniques should be well within his reach. He dropped the leaf he was holding and brought his hands together in front of him, concentrating on the two different energies his body contained. Ino looked confused, but recognized the expression on his face and sat back, allowing him to think. Nearly a minute passed before a small bit of energy leaked out between his hands. It formed a rough sphere, wobbling to and fro and barely maintaining its shape. More important than the shape though was the color. Instead of the expected blue chakra, the energy had a clear purple tinge to it. Even as Ino leaned forward to look closer, the energy dissipated, but the way Naruto laughed told her that he was happy with that result. He jumped to his feet and pulled Ino into a hug. Thank you, you are absolutely brilliant, Ino-chan." Naruto exclaimed. Ino had no idea what she had said that was so brilliant, but she wasn't about to turn down the praise, nor was she about to dismiss the incredibly satisfying knowledge that she had helped her little brother where Shizen had failed Hokage's office. Katsuro is preparing to make his move. Hokage-sama Takao Kurama's team is scheduled for full contact weapons practice this afternoon, and Katsuro has acquired a sharpened sword disguised to appear dull for Takao's opponent. He has also acquired a deadly poison and treated the blade. In addition, he has acquired several similarly disguised and poison kunai apparently as a backup plan. Dragon reported, "Not exactly subtle as he still, it would be virtually impossible to trace this back to the Uchiha if he was successful." The Hokage mused, "Very well, I want Katsuro taken into custody as soon as he makes the switch and taken to TNI. Once we get enough evidence we'll arrest Fugaku. We'll need to move quickly to make sure Fugaku doesn't have time to prepare. If we can catch him off guard we may be able to take him in without a fight, and if he is prepared?" Dragon asked. The Hokage's face became grim. "Then bloodshed may be unavoidable. If it comes to that we may require some additional support. Your brother for instance." Dragon nodded. "He would be most eager to take part in this. He always complains that I get to have all the fun, and nothing would make him happier than to take down Fugaku personally." The Hokage snorted. "No doubt." Same day, Hyuga compound main house training area again. Hayashi Hyuga barked. Hinata slowly picked herself up off the mat and settled back into the stance for her family's famed and feared fighting style, the jukin or gentle fist. Her feet slid apart, her right foot forward and her left back, while her hands mirrored her feet with her left hand forward in a guarding position and her right hand tucked close to her body. Hinata was currently wearing a thin blue shirt and loose black pants tied off with a white belt. She had several bruises already forming on her exposed arms, and the occasional wince as she moved showed she had similar injuries elsewhere. Her indigo hair hung loosely down to shoulder level, swaying slightly whenever she turned her head. Her pale lavender eyes were currently narrowed in determination. Hayashi examined her form for a long moment, then nodded in satisfaction. "Begin," he said. Hinata launched herself forward, her hands moving quickly and firmly as she dueled with her fellow student. Her opponent, her cousin Niji, was wearing an ivory shirt and matching shorts, and his hair, actually longer than Hinata's, was gathered into a ponytail that mimicked Hayashi's own style. He had far fewer bruises than Hinata, though he had not come out of their clashes unscathed. He was also wearing a bandana around his head and was the only person in the room with his forehead covered. Niji's stance matched his cousin's as their hands flashed through the space between them, diverting or blocking each other's strikes as they battled. He slowly began to advance, forcing Hinata to retreat in order to maintain the distance between them. As her stance shifted, Niji suddenly darted to her weak side and struck his hands, blurring. It appeared for a moment as if he had won yet another bout before Hinata bent sideways, allowing Niji's hands to pass harmlessly above her as her own hands lashed out, touching several points on his chest. She was unable to maintain her position for long, however, as she lost balance and fell the rest of the way to the floor with a light thud. Panting, Niji did not follow up on this opening, instead retreating several feet and settling back into his stance. Similarly breathless enough, Hayashi barked again and strode onto the mat towards his two students. Niji relaxed out of his stance and moved to stand next to Hinata, looking down at her panting form. After a moment he thrust out his hand. Hinata reached up and took it with her own, and Niji pulled her to her feet. "Thank you, Niji Nii-san," Hinata said, slowly regaining control of her breathing. "Of course, Hinata-sama," Niji said, smiling. You have improved remarkably in the last month. You would have completely disabled me in that last exchange. Hinata blushed slightly but nodded. They both turned to face Hayashi as he knelt on the mat next to them, motioning for them to join him once they had settled into place, feet tucked under their bodies, backs straight and heads held high. He nodded firmly. What did you do wrong? In that last exchange, he began. Niji spoke first. I overextended on my strike, leaving myself open to a counterattack. My feet were also out of position, slowing my recovery time and preventing me from pivoting away from Hinata's attack, Niji said calmly. Hayashi smiled, pleased with Niji's response. Correct, you were too eager to strike at the opening and did not position yourself properly before attacking. At your current level of skill and experience, you should never sacrifice mobility to strike at an opponent. As you just saw, even with one opponent it can lead to your downfall, and against multiple opponents it is an even worse mistake. Yes, Hayashi-sama, Niji replied, bowing his head as he absorbed the advice. He was used to this post-training discussion and no longer had issues critiquing himself or accepting the advice that followed. He had seen for himself in the year since he began training that he improved far faster when he listened. Hayashi then turned to face Hinata expectantly. She blushed again, still unused to this sort of attention, especially when she was expected to criticize herself. After a moment she offered her own hesitant analysis. I didn't recover properly when I dodged and fell, she offered. Hayashi sighed softly and relaxed his expression a little. It should not be a question, Hinata, he corrected. Still, you are correct. Like Niji, you focused too much on offense and not enough on proper defensive positioning. It worked out in this instance as your strikes would have disabled Niji, but you left yourself open to attack if you had failed, or if other ninja were present during the battle. Hinata shrunk into herself slightly but nodded in acknowledgement of his words. Hayashi was actually impressed. Despite her relative lack of confidence compared to Niji, this response was much better than what had happened at the end of their first training session, when Hayashi had slowly coaxed her into finding something wrong about her own performance and then further explained what she had done wrong and why she had ended up bursting into tears and running from the dojo. Izana had ended up giving him a piece of her mind later that day. Though his wife did understand what he was trying to do, she had also worked with Hinata over the last month, providing an outlet for Hinata's frustrations that complemented Hayashi's more stern approach. Izana had also talked him into adjusting his own approach to these post-training discussions, and even Niji seemed happier with the new way of doing things. As you were both having difficulty on defense, I think our next session will focus on that. That said, you have both done very well in your training so far. Niji, your speed has continued to improve steadily and your stance is generally very stable. The strength behind your blows is also very promising. With time, I think you will be able to penetrate your opponent's guard even during a frontal assault, which will serve you very well once you begin learning the 8 trigrams. Hinata, your speed is also improving steadily and your flexibility is already impressive. If you focus on that, you will be able to easily slip around your opponent's guard and strike at vital points effortlessly. As your footwork improves, I think your mother will have some very interesting techniques to teach you, Hayashi said, smiling encouragingly. He spotted Hisashi lingering near the entrance to the dojo and dismissed his 2 students for the day. Niji enthusiastically greeted his father but was soon sent on his way as the 2 brothers had important business to discuss. It's happening today, Hisashi told his twin without preamble. As the 2 began to walk through the Hyuga compound, they were both currently wearing the same outfit. The only difference between them was the headband that covered Hisashi's forehead while Hayashi's was left bare. Hayashi's face grew tense at the news when within the hour ANBU have requested support from the other clans in case Fugaku intends to resist the Hokage. Hopes a show of force will deter him and we can get through this without bloodshed. And what does our ANBU commander think? Hisashi snorted. Not a chance in hell. Fugaku won't go down without a fight even if he was alone. And knowing him, he won't be. I'm just glad Itachi is out on a mission right now. Really, I didn't think he was powerful enough to pose that sort of threat, Hayashi said quietly. He's not yet. He'd do a lot of good in ANBU though, and things will go a lot smoother for him if he doesn't get caught up in this mess. By the time he gets back, everything will be settled one way or another. Makoto appears clean and the majority of the Uchiha have no part in Fugaku's madness, so there's hope that with Fugaku out of the way things will settle down quick enough. You know, the Kurama aren't going to be satisfied with Fugaku's head alone. They've got a serious bone to pick with the Uchiha. That's for the Hokage and the council to figure out. You're on the council, idiot, Hayashi said amused. Yeah, well, shut up, brother, Hisashi responded petulantly. They shared a quick laugh, but their faces gradually grew grim as they mentally prepared themselves for the coming conflict. Turning to face one another, they clasped forearms and pulled each other into a brotherly embrace. Be safe, they said, and parted ways. Hokage's personal training grounds. Sarutobi surveyed the ninja who were currently preparing themselves to battle Fugaku. Uchiha and any of his clan who supported him, most of them hoped that their preparations would prove unnecessary, but none of them really believed Fugaku would allow himself to be arrested. The best case scenario would be that Fugaku was quickly immobilized and that none of his clan fought against the arrest. To one side, nearly half of his entire ANBU force stood prepared, their masks the only feature distinguishing them from one another. Those who specialized in weapons or used other tools kept them hidden within their cloaks to avoid giving away any information to potential enemies. This gathering of such an elite force, comprised of some of the most powerful and experienced shinobi in all of Konoha, made for an intimidating sight. Dragon was moving through the group, making sure each squad knew their assigned roles and were prepared. Shizen stood near the ANBU. She and her personal team of Mednin loaded down with medical supplies. They would not be involved in any fighting but would be doing their best to make sure no one died on either side. Scattered around the clearing were representatives from the other clans of Konoha. Hayashi Hyuga had brought 8 members from his clan in addition to himself. Their gentle fist techniques would be invaluable in taking down opponents without killing them. The Hyuga's long-standing rivalry with the Uchiha had turned bitter in recent years, and all of the Hyuga appeared eager to commence with the mission. Inoichi Yamanaka, Shikaku Nara, and Chusa Kimichi stood together conversing quietly. 3 other members of the Nara clan stood nearby, but Inoichi and Chusa were the only members of their clans present. That was understandable. While the Nara shadow techniques were even more effective than the Hyuga's gentle fist at capturing opponents, the Yamanaka and Akimichi skills tended to be more dangerous and deadly, and very few in Inoichi's clan had the skill to utilize the mind transfer jutsu. In the midst of battle, the infamous Inoshika Cho trio had honed their teamwork to an incredible level and were considered one of the most effective strike teams in Konoha's history, but their fellow clan members had been unable to replicate their clan head's success. Shibi Aburame had brought 5 members from his clan, and the way their identical outfits of high-collared trench coats and sunglasses hid nearly their entire bodies was as disconcerting in its own way as the appearance of the ANBU. The Aburame would be placed with the ambush teams in open battle. The Uchiha's fire techniques would render the Aburame's insect-based jutsu highly ineffective. Tsum Inuzuka and her partner Kuramaru rounded out the collection of clan heads. Accompanied by 4 members from her clan and their own canine partner, she had a slightly sour look on her face. Tsum had not been pleased when told that her clan would be held in reserve in case the battle went badly or any Uchiha attempted to flee. Sarutobi had held firm on this point, though. Even the weakest of the Inuzuka's jutsu tended to do serious damage to their targets, and he still wanted to preserve as many lives as possible. That Tsum and her clan valued loyalty as highly as the Aburame valued honor also meant that the Inuzuka would accidentally go too far and end up killing opponents they might have incapacitated or disabled. The Kurama clan had wanted to take part as well. Literally every active shinobi ranked chunin or higher from the clan had volunteered. Sarutobi knew their presence would practically guarantee a fight, however, and he wasn't certain whether it would be the Kurama or the Uchiha that would strike the first blow. They had finally relented when the Hokage promised to strip the rank from any Kurama ninja who interfered with Fugaku's arrest, the threat of losing their chance at a permanent seat on the council sufficing to curb their bloodlust. Satisfied that all ninja involved in the operation were present, the Hokage flared his chakra, drawing the attention of the other ninja in the clearing. Everyone understands their roles in the operation. I trust. A chorus of affirmatives rang out, and he nodded in satisfaction. Very well, move out, he said, and vanished. In a shunshin, the other ninja followed quickly, and within seconds the clearing was completely empty. Uchiha District. The Uchiha clan head's home was located on one side of a large open area that served as the traditional gathering place for clan events. The home also had a great deal of space on either side and behind as well, serving to isolate it from the other buildings in the area. Madara Uchiha had originally designed it this way to emphasize the status and importance of the clan head, but it would prove very useful to the Hokage and his ninja on this day. With so much empty space to work with, the various squads were able to completely surround the house while still leaving themselves ample room to maneuver. The ANBU squads were already establishing a secure perimeter to prevent anyone from approaching or leaving the house undetected, and the Hyuga were putting their Byakugan to good use as they scanned the area. The Hyuga carefully monitored the location of any Uchiha ready to intercept them or warn the other ninja of potential resistance. The Hokage himself, accompanied by his ANBU commander, approached Fugaku's home rather than simply breaking in. However, he kept things civil for the moment and knocked on the door. Dragon had already confirmed that Makoto and Sasuke were currently within the house, and Sarutobi wanted to avoid getting them caught up in the conflict if at all possible. Shortly after his knock, Makoto answered the door, a pleasant smile on her face. Her smile quickly faded as she took in the Hokage's grim expression and the ninja prepared for battle surrounding her house. She couldn't see all of them, but what she could see told her everything she needed to know. It's come to this, as it, she asked quietly, her expression more resigned than surprised. The Hokage nodded, a sad smile on his face. It's a nice day out. I think Sasuke would enjoy spending some time in the park, don't you? She smiled gratefully, a lone tear sliding down her cheek. Thank you, Hokage Sama, she said, and stepped back to allow the two ninja to enter. Dragon kept careful watch for any reaction from the ninja currently gathered in Fugaku's office, but so far they did not appear to be aware of the events occurring outside the room. Makoto gathered up Sasuke and quickly left the house, shushing his questions as they passed the Hokage and the ANBU commander. The ninja gathered outside allowed her to leave, already aware that she was not one of the targets they were supposed to capture. Sarutobi turned to Dragon, an expectant look on his face. Dragon nodded and began his report. Hokage-sama, there are 4 ninja in the office with Fugaku, all jounin. In addition, there are some suspicious chakra patterns on the walls and floor of his office that I believe to be seals, most likely traps of some sort. It would be unwise to approach him directly. Dragon said, do you have any suggestions? Sarutobi asked quietly. Yes, Hokage-sama. After listening to his ANBU commander's plan, the Hokage thought for a few moments before nodding in agreement. Very well, we shall do this your way. Same day, inside Fugaku's office, once Katsuro reports back, I want you 4 to accompany him on another mission. Fugaku said, a smirk on his face. The head of the Ogawa clan is currently traveling to Otafukugai, and I want you to make sure he never makes it back. If the other ninja in the room had any concerns about the nature of the mission given to them, they did not voice them. They all just nodded in acceptance and waited for their leader to dismiss them or give them further instructions. While you are there, I also want you to, Fugaku continued, but was interrupted by another knock at the door. What is it, Makoto? Fugaku snapped. The door opened and Fugaku was shocked to see the Hokage and the ANBU commander walk into the room. The Hokage had a pleasant smile on his face, but his eyes were furious. Dragon's hands were hidden under his cloak, but Fugaku got the impression that the ANBU commander was already holding weapons. Hello, Fugaku, the Hokage said. Hokage-sama, to what do I owe the pleasure? Fugaku said, taking a moment to recover his equilibrium. The Uchiha ninja in the room shifted uneasily, unsure whether they should remain in the office or leave. Fugaku discreetly motioned them to move to his side of the room, and they slowly began walking in that direction. The Hokage just watched silently for a moment, waiting until all the Uchiha in the room were gathered behind Fugaku's desk. Sarutobi glanced at Dragon and inclined his head slightly, then looked back to Fugaku again. There's nothing pleasurable about this visit, Fugaku, the Hokage said, the smile fading from his face. Katsuro has been taken into custody and already confessed as to what his orders were and who gave them. It's over. Things will go much better for you and your clan if you surrender peacefully. Fugaku considered playing dumb for a moment, but quickly discarded the idea. There was no use trying to bluff the Hokage. Sarutobi was far too careful to make a move like this without making sure all his kunai were sharp and ready. It was unfortunate for the Hokage that he'd chosen to have the confrontation here. However, Fugaku laughed and leaned back in his chair. You know, Aruzen, he began conversationally, addressing the Hokage by name and intentionally leaving off the honorific. I've wondered for a long time which of us was the better ninja. I admit that even now I am not as powerful as you were in your prime. I don't think anyone, even Minato, could truly measure up to the god of shinobi, but you are old, Aruzen, and you've grown weak. Fugaku watched the Hokage's face for any reaction, but he didn't so much as twitch at the provocation. Shrugging slightly, he continued, even in that first meeting after the tailed beast's attack where you and Kensuke railroaded the council into appointing you as Hokage, I could have beaten you. Even then I could have prevented you from becoming Hokage again. I let you win out of respect for what you had done for Konoha. I let you hold on to my title for a little longer so you could die in peace and I would ascend uncontested, but it seems you were going to throw my generosity back into my face. Fugaku said. He stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust from his clothing and straightening his vest. Very well, if this is the way it must be, then so be it. He laid one hand upon his desk and channeled chakra into the security seal hidden there. A barrier snapped into place that divided the room. In the moments it took the explosive seals lining the room to activate, he locked eyes with Sarutobi one last time, a mocking grin in his face. Farewell, old fool. A massive explosion rocked the room and the barrier nearly collapsed as it withstood the force of the blast, as the dust settled, revealing gaping holes in the walls where the explosion had sent shrapnel and debris flying throughout the house. Fugaku remembered that Makoto and Sasuke had been Home it didn't matter, he assured himself, ignoring the small pang of regret. Itachi was safely away on a mission, so the Uchiha legacy was secure. Fugaku smiled as he waited for the dust to clear so he could observe the Hokage's remains for himself. He also wanted to pull the mask from the ANBU commander, assuming his head was still intact. He'd always wondered who dragon was. He frowned when he noticed that there was no blood and began to panic when he realized there were no signs that either the Hokage or dragon had ever been there at all. What happened? Where were they? How could they have? His face paled as he realized what had happened. The Hokage and dragon had sent in shadow clones rather than entering themselves, and he had wasted his best chance to kill the Hokage on an empty shell. Cursing, he began running towards the front door of his house, the other Uchiha ninja following closely behind. He needed to gather reinforcements and rally his clan before this happened, he thought. Ruefully staring out at the assembled ninja, every face he could see was glaring at him in hatred or disgust. With the Hokage standing front and center beyond the perimeter of ANBU, he could see his clan gathering, undoubtedly drawn by the explosion. Well, if he could delay a little longer, enough of his clan would be present to even the odds. Even the weakest Uchiha would be more than sufficient to take on the ninja gathered here. He also saw that most of the clan heads were present. Good, killing them would disrupt the other ninja enough for the Uchiha to seize control. All he needed was a little time. Sarutobi watched as Fugaku looked around the area, taking in the many ninja who had gathered to bring him into custody. Fugaku's face twisted into a snarl as he realized he was outnumbered, though it quickly settled back into a neutral expression. Fugaku then fell into a defensive stance, as if daring anyone to attack him. Give it up, Fugaku. This is your last chance to surrender peacefully. If you continue to resist, I will put you down personally. Then we'll see how much this old fool's skills have dulled over the years, Sarutobi said, his eyes hard. The other ninja readied their own weapons or set their hands into the initial hand sign of their favorite jutsu, ready to unleash their techniques at a moment's notice. Fugaku did not respond, instead slowly sweeping his gaze around him. Sarutobi waited for nearly a minute, but it seemed Fugaku intended to resist until the bitter end. Just as the Hokage readied himself to attack, Fugaku's voice rang out. Uchiha, he cried, his voice amplified by a simple sound. Jutsu, hear me. The Hokage and the other clans have grown jealous of our power and are trying to destroy our clan once and for all. It is the Uchiha who have carried this village through countless dangers. It is the Uchiha who have sacrificed to keep the village alive, and it is the Uchiha who should be ruling Konoha. These usurpers seek to cast us down from our rightful place. Are we going to allow this to continue? The Hokage hesitated, watching the reactions of the assembled Uchiha out of the corner of his eye. If he attacked now, the entire clan would likely support their leader, and this would turn into a bloodbath on both sides before he could raise his own voice to refute Fugaku's words. However, the Uchiha clan head called out again, if you be a true Uchiha, then you will stand with your clan and strike now. So saying, Fugaku activated his Sharingan, his eyes turning blood red, and the three tomo that marked a fully matured Sharingan spinning madly. The other Uchiha who accompanied him and quite a few from the Uchiha gathering outside the perimeter activated their own Sharingan as one. They struck and the battle began. Their first wave of attacks were mostly genjutsu based, as those capable of using their Sharingan in this manner did so. The ninja accompanying the Hokage were caught off guard by the abrupt start of the battle, and several fell victim to the illusion techniques. The more experienced among the Uchiha had chosen the form of their illusion for simplicity and maximum effectiveness, and these proved to be the most devastating for the Hokage's ninja. To them it appeared as though all of their companions had transformed into Uchiha ninja, and even as they began breaking the illusion, they reflexively sprung apart, trying to gain distance from the potential attackers. The most dangerous illusions were always those that had a grain of truth after all, and it was possible that the Uchiha truly were among them. The illusions were dispelled within seconds, but not before several ninja had been hit with kunai or ninjutsu. The perimeter collapsed into a chaotic mess. The Uchiha who supported Fugaku charged forward or began to unleash ninjutsu against their opponents, while other Uchiha who wanted no part of the battle began to flee. The Hokage himself stood his ground. He had avoided making direct eye contact with Fugaku from the beginning, as he had ample experience fighting Uchiha and knew that the most basic tenet of battling an Uchiha was to never look them in the eye. He had tried to impress this information on the other ninja, but it seemed not all of them had taken the lesson to heart. You have doomed your clan, Fugaku, the Hokage said. He reached up and mockingly adjusted the hat that functioned as a symbol of the Hokage's office. It seems that you are going to throw my generosity back into my face. Very well, if this is how it must be, then so be It the Hokage taunted, a smirk on his face. Fugaku snarled, "I will kill you myself, Sarutobi, and take my hat from your bloody corpse." With that he charged forward, hands moving rapidly as he prepared a ninjutsu to attack. Shibi Aburame watched from the shadow of an alley as the cloud of insects descended upon another Uchiha, swiftly draining all the available chakra from the ninja. While he had avoided exposure to the Genjutsu, the confusion that had descended upon the battlefield meant that it was unclear which Uchiha were hostile and which bystanders. The group had been prepared for this eventuality, though, and his standing orders were to incapacitate and detain any Uchiha who remained on the battlefield. Once his insects completely drained the Uchiha, they returned to his body and he melted back into the shadows to search for his next target. Shibi suddenly leaped backwards, avoiding the large fireball that impacted the ground where he had stood a moment earlier. Looking up, he saw an Uchiha ninja sneering down at him from the roof of a nearby building. Sharingan activated and spinning one of the bug users, the ninja sneered, "I know how to deal with your type." The ninja flashed through a quick series of hand seals and drew in a deep breath before unleashing another fireball. He laughed darkly when the fireball engulfed Shibi's form. Pathetic. Shibi appeared behind the ninja and with a few rapid punches rendered him unconscious as his insects flowed out of his trench coat to consume whatever remaining chakra the Uchiha had. The Uchiha had attempted to use the Grand Fireball technique against an enemy who had already proven he could dodge. At worst, the Sharingan's abilities all relied on having a direct line of sight to the enemy, and by using the Grand Fireball the ninja had effectively blocked his own vision and rendered his prized Sharingan meaningless. Even aside from those problems, Shibi was much faster than his Uchiha opponent, yet the Uchiha had not even attempted to dodge or follow up on his own attack. It was like it never even occurred to him that he could miss. "Yes, you are," Shibi told the unconscious Uchiha, then moved off to find his next opponent. The battle was not going nearly so smoothly for Shikaku as he was facing two of the more experienced Uchiha. Both of his opponents were staying in the open and keeping their distance, preventing him from using any of his shadow-based jutsu. They were also keeping him on his toes as they tossed low powered but highly accurate bursts of flame all around him, steering him away from any shadows. He responded by flinging kunai at them, but the projectiles were avoided as the Uchiha easily tracked the weapons and moved around them. He considered attempting jutsu of his own, but knew it would just be a waste of chakra. Under these circumstances, Shikaku cursed when he noticed a third Uchiha approaching, apparently intending to support the other two. He had successfully kept two Uchiha occupied with minimal effort, but a third would alter the odds too heavily against him. He prepared to break away from the fight to gain some ground and potentially lure the Uchiha into a trap, or at least link up with reinforcements of his own, but suddenly grinned when the new arrival lashed out and caught one of his attackers on the back of the head, knocking him unconscious. The other Uchiha was shocked by this apparent betrayal and let his focus lapse, which Shikaku quickly capitalized on as he blurred forward. Once he was in range, his shadow lanced out and connected with the Uchiha's own, freezing the ninja in place. A quick strangling shadow jutsu later and both of his opponents were neutralized. "Man, these eyes are weird," the new arrival said, rubbing his eyes and blinking rapidly. "Thanks for the help, Ichi," Shikaku said lazily. "How long have you got left?" "A minute tops. My chakra is draining like crazy with these eyes active, and I can't shut them off." "Where's your body? I'll take care of this one and link up with you," Shikaku said. Looking around, he spotted a few injured that the Mednin were already working on, but what caught his attention were the still forms scattered around Uchiha and ninja from his own side. Among them, he had recommended that the Hokage bring only experienced Jounin and ANBU on this operation. Even with the Uchiha's modest numerical advantage, the skill and experience of Konoha's forces should have ensured that the overall advantage lay with them. The battle was still going in their favor, but that initial wave of Genjutsu had wreaked havoc. He should have spent more time emphasizing the need to avoid eye contact. He shook himself and refocused as Inoichi answered. "2 buildings that way upper floor. Chusa's keeping watch for me." "All right now," Shikaku said, his shadow already moving. The possessed Uchiha barely had a moment to blink in confusion before the strangling shadow jutsu sent him into unconsciousness. Yugubo Yuzuki was a relatively new member of ANBU, having only joined the group a little over a year ago. She was actually surprised she had been allowed to participate in such a high-profile mission, but supposed her inclusion was due to the skill of her squad as a whole more than her own individual qualifications. She was feeling her lack of experience clearly at the moment as she faced off against an older Uchiha Jounin. She wanted to retreat, but her partner Raven had taken a kunai to the shoulder and sighed in the initial attack and was currently bleeding out on the ground. Behind her, if she left, the Uchiha would no doubt finish him off before pursuing her. She needed to end this quickly but had so far been unable to land a single blow against her opponent. She was keeping the Hokage's warning to never look the Uchiha in the eye in mind, but it was distracting her and slowing her reactions as she had to fight her own instincts. The Uchiha smirked. "You aren't all that impressive these days, Fugaku-sama. We'll have to clear out the trash once he becomes Hokage." Yugugo growled lowly and stabbed her sword forward, but the Uchiha merely leaned to the side and lashed out with his kunai, scoring a deep gash on her arm. She leapt back to gain distance, but the Uchiha followed a quick fireball, forcing her to dodge to the side. She bit back a curse. Now the Uchiha stood between her and Raven. If she retreated any further, she would be unable to stop the Uchiha if he tried to attack her down partner. She threw herself forward with a yell, blade flashing through the air. The Uchiha lazily blocked all her strikes with a single kunai. The three tomo in his eyes spinning, he began pressing forward again, forcing her back on the defensive as his strikes slowly but inexorably moving her blade out of position. A few more exchanges and she would be unable to block his attack in time. "You aren't all that bad, I suppose, but you are nothing compared to..." He suddenly let out a cry of pain and lurched forward. Yugugo didn't hesitate, as her blade lashed out, first cutting through the arm holding the kunai and then snapping upwards, slicing straight through the Uchiha's throat. His eyes widened in disbelief before he collapsed. Yugugo stared at his prone form for a long moment, panting, "Bastard should shut up." She heard her head snap towards Raven, who was lying on the ground, one arm extended in a throwing motion. She let out a choked laugh before dashing to his side, hands glowing green. "Good work, cat," Raven said softly before he swallowed the blood pill that Yugugo shoved into his mouth. His color slowly began to improve as the pill did its work and replenished some of the blood he had lost. "Thanks for the assist, Raven. I wouldn't have lasted much longer." Yugugo smiled, slowly calming down as she got his bleeding under control. "Get me healed up and I'll call it even." "No, wait, you have to go on a date with me," Raven panted out. Yugugo barked a laugh. "We'll see," she said. Fugaku snarled as he failed to hit the Hokage yet again. He and two of his followers were coordinating their attacks against the Hokage, sending waves of fire flying through the air and spikes of earth stabbing up from the ground, and all they had managed to do was singe his robes. The old fool was surprisingly agile, and even with his eyes telling him exactly how the Hokage would move, Fugaku was unable to trap him long enough to land a solid blow. They had managed to separate the Hokage from the ANBU commander, however, with the other two Uchiha running interference to prevent Dragon from assisting the Hokage. Fugaku expected Sarutobi to worry about his isolation, but the old man just had a slight look of pity on his face as he nimbly dodged the various attacks. The Hokage began speaking, his tone lecturing. Even as he continued to dodge, there was little evidence of his exertion, merely a minor pause as he drew in a breath every now and then. The Hokage's nonchalance only served to infuriate Fugaku even further. The Sharingan is widely considered to be one of the most powerful bloodlines in the world. Its abilities are nearly unique and completely impossible to replicate outside of other bloodlines. Konoha is often considered very fortunate to have two Jujutsu bloodlines among her ranks. Unfortunately, the Sharingan has many flaws, not the least of which is the arrogance it instills in those who possess it. The Hokage said, "Shut up, you old bastard." Fugaku snapped. He studied the ghostly image that showed him the path the Hokage would take carefully, but the stream of fire that lanced out at the Hokage merely singed his robes when it should have cut right through the old man's chest. The flaws innate in the Sharingan are as follows. First, even though the user can predict where the target will move, that does not mean they have the ability to hit their target. If the user lacks the speed or accuracy necessary, they gain little to no benefit from the prediction. In addition, skilled and experienced opponents with a high degree of chakra control can subtly manipulate their own chakra emissions to create false images. The Hokage continued. Fugaku paled as the Hokage's image suddenly showed him dodging simultaneously in 3 different directions, while shortly thereafter the actual Hokage dodged in a fourth. That old bastard had been throwing off the Sharingan's predictions the entire time. The Hokage smirked mockingly, riling Fugaku even further. Second, the Genjutsu capabilities of the Sharingan require direct eye contact with the subject. Simply not looking the user in the eye will protect the opponent. Fugaku already knew that the Hokage had been avoiding eye contact since before the battle began, but the Hokage's lecturing tone still drove another barb home. He redoubled his efforts, closing the distance and pumping chakra throughout his body to speed his movements. Maintaining the Sharingan throughout the battle, coupled with the numerous ninjutsu he had launched at the Hokage, was beginning to take its toll, and the Hokage had yet to retaliate in any fashion. He needed to end this soon Before he completely exhausted himself, the Hokage suddenly shifted directions and closed with Fugaku. Even as the false images showed him dodging away, Fugaku attempted to adjust his movements to match, but the Hokage was only inches away. Even as his eyes widened, he felt several blows land on his torso, each carrying the force of a sledgehammer, and he was flung backwards to land roughly on the ground. He recovered quickly and leapt to his feet as Sarutobi focused on dodging the attacks of the two other Uchiha as they attempted to capitalize on the Hokage's distraction. Fugaku smirked as he evaluated his condition. The blows had hurt, but they had done no lasting damage. Third, if the opponent closes in and attacks at extremely close range, they can hide the chakra emissions and movements of their limbs from the sight of the Sharingan, rendering it useless. Though you are apparently unaware of the history, this is why the famed interceptor style of the Uchiha focuses on keeping the opponent's movements restricted and maintaining a suitable distance, forcing himself to ignore the false images the Hokage was projecting. Fugaku was finally able to spot an opening in the Hokage's guard. He smirked cruelly as he rushed forward. Fugaku flung a handful of kunai that finally forced the Hokage to dodge in the direction he wanted and pulled two more from his weapons pouch as his followers turned the ground beneath the Hokage's feet to mud and launched another earth spike that nearly impaled the Hokage. He slipped around the attack and thrust the kunai forward. His smirk grew into a full-blown grin as he felt the blade sink into the old man's stomach and heard his gasp of pain. He raised the second blade, ready to sink it into the Hokage's chest and end this battle once and for all, when the Hokage's grimace of pain suddenly turned into a cruel smirk of his own, for he coughed and burst into smoke that obscured the Uchiha's vision. Fugaku heard two sharp cracks even as he leapt away, trying to gain distance. He hadn't even cleared the smoke cloud when a staff struck his leg, shattering bone and causing him to spin in midair. The pain barely had time to register before the staff thrust forward and caught him in the chest, shattering ribs and slamming him into the ground. Two more swift blows shattered his right arm and left collarbone, and he could no longer hold back his scream of pain. The smoke finally cleared, revealing an impossible sight. Sarutobi stood above him, clad in his black battle gear and staff, poised to strike yet again. The Hokage's eyes were harsh and cold, not at all like the grandfatherly persona he normally portrayed, for he said again, the Sharingan is completely useless without a line of sight to the opponent. Thus the single most effective tactic in battling an Uchiha is to never let them see you in the first place. That's impossible. Fugaku choked out. Burned coat, you may be powerful, Fugaku, but you never learn not to rely solely on your eyes. You are correct. That Akage Bunshin will dispel shortly after it sustains any damage, and that includes the clothing as it is part of the construct. I simply removed my real coat and had my clone wear it, and that was all it took to deceive you. The Hokage said, a look of pity on his face. And now it is time to end this farce. You have gone too far, Fugaku, and I fear your clan will pay the price of your madness. Fugaku laughed at the Hokage, a choking pain sound full of derision. He managed to conquer his pain long enough to gasp out, fine, arrest me, put me on trial, I will still win in the end, old fool. The Hokage shook his head grimly. There will be no trial, Fugaku, you had your chance and threw it away. You will not get another. A sudden look of panic crossed Fugaku's face before it turned to derision once again. You couldn't kill your monster of a student. What makes you think you can kill me? And that is where you and I differ, Fugaku. I learned from my mistakes, the Hokage said, and thrust the staff down. The fighting had already ended by the time the Hokage returned to the square in front of the clan head's house. The ANBU commander accompanied him, having dispatched the other two Uchiha with only a minor injury. To show for it, the Hokage had donned his ceremonial coat and hat once again, ignoring the scorch marks and holes for the time being. Shikaku, as Jounin commander, was coordinating the cleanup when Sarutobi arrived. Report, the Hokage ordered. Shikaku waved a lazy hand, motioning to the activity around them. We have gained full control of the Uchiha district, he began. There are 9 Uchiha reported dead so far. You can add 3 to that total, including Fugaku. The Hokage interrupted, and 2 more added. Dragon. Shikaku grimaced but nodded. 14 deaths so far. Shizen-sama and her team are dealing with the injuries, and there are several in critical condition at this point. Our own forces took a hit, especially during that initial attack, with 6 deaths and another 11 that will need to undergo serious treatment. The Hokage bowed his head. It was always a sad day when a Konoha ninja died, and to have lost 20 ninja with several more that may die before the day ended was a terrible blow. That the deaths were the result of Konoha ninja fighting each other made it a tragedy as bad in its own way as the tailed beast's attack had been what of the captured Uchiha. He finally asked. Shikaku sighed. That's even more troublesome. Once the battle began, mission parameters dictated that all Uchiha be treated as potential hostiles as long as they remained within the battle zone. Once the bloodshed started, the Aburame and Hyuga in particular got a little overzealous, and we ended up capturing, as of last reports, 87 Uchiha. He grumbled. The Hokage quickly recalled the reports on the Uchiha district from the planning session. That's basically every Uchiha in the district. Yeah, Shikaku continued, it's troublesome, but at this point I'm forced to recommend that we take all Uchiha into custody while we sort this out. Some of the clan heads, particularly Hayashi and Sum, were not at all pleased with how many Uchiha were willing to support Fugaku. Fugaku's little speech did its job too well. This is rapidly heading towards our worst case scenario. He finished. Dragon spoke up next. I concur with Shikaku-san's analysis. Hokage-sama, I can have ANBU ready to move in 10 minutes. Just give the word. The Hokage sighed and slipped his hat down so that it obscured his face as he thought. Shikaku and Dragon waited respectfully as Sarutobi considered his next move. After a few seconds he raised the hat back up and nodded firmly. Shikaku, I want you to personally find Makoto and Sasuke and escort them to my office. She should be in a park nearby. Dragon, all other Uchiha are to be immediately detained, and I want squads dispatched to meet all Uchiha currently away on missions and escort them back to Konoha effective immediately. I will supply replacement teams as needed. And Dragon, I want you to handle Itachi personally to make sure nothing goes wrong. Itachi may be the best chance we have to prevent the complete loss of the clan. Shikaku bowed lazily, then vanished in a shunshin to carry out his orders. Dragon bowed sharply, then began rounding up ANBU. The Hokage observed the scene around him for a long moment. From his position he could see several ninja lying unmoving on the ground, small pools of blood surrounding them. Shizen was currently working desperately to save an injured Nara who had been caught by one of the Uchiha's fire techniques. Even if he survived, the scars would likely remain with him for the rest of his life. There was another Mednin tending to an Uchiha who had taken a stab wound to his chest, while a Hyuga hovered nearby, warily watching the nearly comatose Uchiha for any sign of aggression. Even from this distance the Hokage could see the obvious reluctance with which the Mednin was helping the injured Uchiha. The Hokage feared the ill will towards the Uchiha clan. Even those who had not taken part in this battle would only get worse from here. Konoha could not afford to lose even more ninja, but the situation looked grim. At the moment, damn you Fugaku, the Hokage cursed again. Hokage's office. The remaining clan heads had gathered in the Hokage's office to discuss the aftermath of the Uchiha rebellion. As they were already calling it, their faces ranged from solemn to angry, but they kept themselves civil for the moment. Makoto Uchiha was not present. Even though in the wake of Fugaku's death she was technically the head of the Uchiha clan, the Hokage had decided it would be better if she remained out of sight for the moment. She and Sasuke were currently staying with the Aburame clan, as Shibi had volunteered to give them shelter until their home was habitable once again. Makoto had gratefully accepted, knowing that Shibi would do everything in his power to keep them safe from any hot-headed ninja who might seek to take revenge on her or her son for her husband's actions. The ANBU commander was also not present, as he had already left on his mission to retrieve Itachi Uchiha. It would be several days before he returned with his charge in tow, and the situation would hopefully have calmed considerably by then. Once Hayashi arrived, his normally stoic face particularly harsh this evening. The Hokage began the meeting. Let us begin with the final death toll. Shikaku, yes, Hokage-sama. Shizen-sama has reported that all injured ninja have either succumbed to their wounds or begun their recovery, so the final toll stands thus. From our forces, 2 ANBU and 5 Jounin level ninja dead. Of our 11 injured, 6 will be in long-term rehabilitation, 3 in short-term rehabilitation, and the remaining 2 are expected to return to duty within the week. From the Uchiha, 10 Jounin and 14 Chunin level ninja dead. Of the 27 injured, 19 will be in long-term rehabilitation, 5 in short-term rehabilitation, and 3 will never recover sufficiently to resume their duties. All 3 of those had their chakra networks destroyed by Jukin attacks, he added, giving Hayashi lazy glance. The Hyuga clan head's expression did not change. The Hokage nodded grimly. What of the remaining Uchiha, he asked, shrugging slightly. Shikaku resumed his summary. There are currently 7 Uchiha in the field. 5 Chunin and 2 Jounin teams have already been dispatched to escort those Uchiha back to Konoha. All other Uchiha have been accounted for and are currently in custody, with the exception of Makoto and Sasuke, who are under the protection of the Aburame clan. Where does that leave the police force? Inoichi asked curiously. In bad shape, Shikaku replied. While the Uchiha represented only 40% of the total force, that 40% made up 90% of the leadership, obviously including the chief. As it stands, the police force will be unable to function come tomorrow. Inoichi grimaced. The police force didn't do much in the way of ninja work, but they were vital to keeping the village running smoothly. Every ninja that had to do police work was a ninja that wasn't running missions, and thus not bringing in income. It wasn't an issue when the Uchiha were running the police, but civilians alone wouldn't be able to handle some of the problems that can come up inside a ninja village. Drunk or unruly ninja are still ninja. Chuzutsu. The Hokage called out, I want you to pick out several members from your clans and take temporary control of the police force. We'll need to work out a permanent solution, but for now focus on keeping the force running. Let me know if you need additional help. Sum and Chuza nodded. Hayashi spoke up next. I can also volunteer some ninja from the branch house. Hokage-sama. The Hokage sighed internally. Hayashi was already angling to replace the Uchiha as the internal police force. Sarutobi couldn't really blame him, but that could ultimately lead to a repeat of the current situation down the line. No, he had already eliminated the idea of assigning a single clan control of the police. Still, he nodded in acceptance for the time being. Thank you, Hayashi. With that problem dealt with for the moment, I want to focus on the Uchiha clan itself. The Kurama are calling for blood. Between the attempted assassination of their genin and the rebellion of the Uchiha, they want the entire clan locked away. Konoha can't afford to lose that many active shinobi, however, so we need another solution. Inoichi, I want your clan working around the clock to sort out the innocent members of the clan. I want a list on my desk as soon as possible detailing which members of the clan are still loyal. I also want to know any laws they've broken, any secrets they're keeping everything for the time being. Any Uchiha released had better be a damn saint. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Hokage-sama. Hayashi, I want your clan working with ANBU to sweep the Uchiha district. All seals should be deactivated, all documents seized, all weapons caches cleared out. Keep a record of who owns what. Any Uchiha proven innocent will have their assets returned, but all other assets will be taken as fines and reparations. Understood, Hokage-sama. The Hokage sighed and massaged the bridge of his nose as he leaned back in his chair. Alright, next is the council. The Kurama have also petitioned to strip the Uchiha of their seat on the council, and I'm inclined to agree. The problem will be the civilians. Actually, Hokage-sama. Shikaku interrupted, I might have an idea for that. I'm listening. Well, the laws concerning the council state that all vacant seats must be filled before any votes not directly related to those seats can be taken, unless there exists a state of emergency. The last such emergency was the aftermath of the tailed beast's attack. Under those circumstances, all vacant seats were assumed to vote with the Hokage essentially granting you those extra votes for a limited time. That's true, but even if Makoto doesn't attend the meeting, the only vacant seat is the Uchiha. Chusa interjected. Shikaku smirked, his eyes dancing with mirth. That is the only vacant seat at the moment. I'm thinking we pull an Uchiha and steal one of Fugaku's techniques. If we council chambers, esteemed counselors, thank you for responding on such short notice. A terrible event has occurred as devastating in its own way as the tailed beast's attack, and all of Konoha will need to unite to ensure our continued survival and prosperity. The civilian counselors stirred uneasily, wondering what was going on. They looked to their ninja counterparts, noticing that Fugaku was not present yesterday afternoon. An Uchiha clan member attempted to assassinate a ninja of the Kurama clan when the attack was thwarted. The ninja eventually confessed that Fugaku Uchiha himself had ordered the attack. When I attempted to take Fugaku into custody, he and several of his clan resisted arrest and attempted to overthrow Konoha's government in retaliation. The civilians gasped in shock or shouted in disbelief. It took a minute for the Hokage to restore order, but he soon resumed his explanation. Many ninja were lost in the battle and many more are wounded and currently unable to return to duty. This loss of manpower seriously threatens Konoha's stability and safety, and I am thus declaring a state of emergency as Konoha law dictates. The council may with a 2/3 majority overturn my decision if they feel such a state does not actually exist. Shikaku, please conduct the vote as expected. Every ninja counselor voted in agreement with the Hokage, with the Uchiha seat abstaining. The civilian result was mixed, for voted with the Hokage 6 against. Very well, the decree stands. Konoha is now in a state of emergency. As Hokage, it is my sworn duty to maintain the stability of Konoha. ANBU 10 ANBU suddenly appeared within the chamber surrounding 5 civilians, all of whom had voted against the Hokage. Counselors, you are hereby arrested for corruption, conspiracy to commit murder, and conspiracy to commit treason. You will be detained by ANBU until such time as a trial can be arranged, as Konoha is currently in a state of emergency that may take some time. Take them away. Their protests were swiftly cut off as the ANBU removed them from the room. The 5 remaining civilian counselors were white-faced, wondering if they would be next. The Hokage turned to face them, his face stern. Counselors, you have not committed any crimes of note. I commend you for your honesty and integrity, the Hokage said. The counselors smiled tremulously but did not feel particularly reassured. For my next order of business, I call for a review of the following laws: the law pertaining to permanent council status for clans, the law pertaining to civilian seats on the council, the law pertaining to which seats may vote on which issues, and the law pertaining to the disposition of the Konoha police force. I call for a single vote for all of the above laws. Do I have a second? Every ninja in the room issued a firm seconded. One of the civilian counselors stood trembling slightly. Unsurprisingly, it was the only remaining counselor who had voted against him earlier. Hokage-sama, you can't do that. The law requires that all council seats be filled before a vote can be called. You are correct. Unless a state of emergency exists. How fortunate that a state of emergency was just declared. In this circumstance, all empty seats vote with the Hokage. But you can't, that's illegal, shouted the civilian. His shock momentarily overcoming his fear, the Hokage surged to his feet, slamming his fist upon the table. His already grim face became positively stony, and a small amount of killing intent began to leak into the room. The civilian blanched and dropped back into his chair. Let me speak plainly, he growled. The civilian seats were added to this council out of respect for your contributions to the growth and prosperity of Konoha. I understand the rationale, and despite recent events I still agree with it, he said. However, in the last 5 years this council's powers have been consistently twisted and abused until they are nothing more than a mockery of their original purpose. This abuse led directly to Fugaku Uchiha deciding that he and he alone should decide the fate of this village, and if you had had your way he would have succeeded. What I do now is no more illegal than the outdated and short-sighted process that would have seen a madman elected our next Hokage based on the whims and greed of civilians who should have had no say in the matter to begin with. That ends now. Be grateful that I am allowing civilians to remain on the council at all by the very laws you have so eagerly twisted to suit your own greed and arrogance. I could strip every civilian from the council and demand any punishment I see fit. So, let me tell you what will happen. The civilian seats will no longer have any right to vote on a strictly ninja matter, and should there be any doubt it will be the Hokage who decides if the civilians are allowed to vote. The civilian seats will no longer have any vote on ninja law, and they most especially will have no vote on the appointment of the Hokage. The civilian seats will be restricted to dealing with civilian matters, as they should have been from the beginning. The practice of voting to appoint temporary seats has proven to be highly susceptible to corruption. Henceforth the Hokage, the ANBU commander, the Jounin commander, and one representative from both the ninja and civilian seats shall discuss the matter and appoint a worthy counselor. The Hokage slowly sank back into his chair, finally letting up on his killing intent. The civilians were staring at him in shock. It had been a very long time since they had seen this side of the Hokage, and several had chosen to forget that it existed at all. Now then, I believe I called for a vote. We have much work to do, so let's get on with it, shall we? Time skip near Wave Country. Hello Dragon-sama, Itachi said calmly, turning his head slightly to stare into the branches of a tree. The two Chunin who were accompanying him on his mission in Inuzuka and in Aburame turned to look at him questioningly. Dragon dropped out of the tree and landed lightly on the ground. You've improved even more, I see, the ANBU commander complimented. Thank you Dragon-sama, Itachi said, his expression not changing in the least. The Inuzuka gaped at the ANBU commander while the Aburame's insects began to hum in agitation. The Inuzuka's canine partner growled softly, not pleased that someone had managed to sneak up on him. May I ask why you have sought us out? Itachi asked. Dragon sighed. I have come to recall your team to Konoha. Your scouting mission will have to end here. With whatever information you have managed to gather so far, you are to return to Konoha immediately. What? Why? Cried out the Inuzuka. We just found a solid lead on the bandits in the area. Because those are your orders, Chunin. Itachi studied Dragon for a long moment before nodding. Very well, he said. The Inuzuka grumbled under his breath, but turned to move in the direction of Konoha. Time skip Konoha gates. Itachi noticed immediately that something had changed within Konoha. The guards watching the gate tensed when they saw him, and did not relax even while Dragon was explaining the reason for their return. A couple of civilians who caught sight of him glared in a mixture of disgust and poorly disguised fear. His teammates were directed to return to their homes immediately for a meeting with their clan, but Dragon kept him back and instead escorted him to the Hokage's office. Itachi quickly noticed that even though he could see several police patrols, it was either a Hyuga Kimichi or Inuzuka who was leading them. In fact, he had yet to see a single Uchiha since he entered Konoha. The glares or wary looks he received as he moved through Konoha continued. Itachi kept his face carefully neutral, but inside he was disgusted. His father's plotting and treasonous activities had finally caught up with him, and it appeared the entire clan would be paying the price. He held no love for his father. The man had never been particularly affectionate to begin with, but after the tailed beast's attack, Fugaku had changed, becoming even colder and more distant. He had pushed Itachi harder and harder in training, always ranting about the glorious future of the Uchiha. He did not resent the training He understood the utility of power and knew it was always better to be strong rather than weak. No, Itachi resented the way his father looked at him, the way his father spoke to him as if he were a tool or a weapon to be honed and sharpened. He had become accustomed to such treatment from others, but it hurt more than he had thought possible to have his own father look at him like that. His mother had treated him as family, but she had her own problems dealing with Fugaku and did not always have the time or energy to look after Itachi. Even she had begun treating him as if he were an adult rather than her own child, though she could occasionally be affectionate and was always supportive. It was Sasuke to whom he felt closest. His little brother looked up to him as someone to admire and emulate, and even though he was often kept busy and away from home, another reason to dislike his father, he made sure to spend as much time as possible with Sasuke. There was no fear or wariness, no jealousy or envy, just childlike admiration and happiness. It made Itachi feel human. When they finally arrived at the Hokage's office, Itachi was prepared for anything from revocation of his ninja license to immediate arrest on charges of treason. Dragon Itachi-kun, glad to see you back safe and sound, the Hokage said pleasantly as they entered the office. Thank you, Hokage-sama, the ANBU commander replied as he moved to stand beside the Hokage's desk, both focused on Itachi. Itachi shifted slightly, the only outward sign of his unease. Then spoke. Hokage-sama, may I ask why am I here? Am I not to be detained along with the rest of my clan? The Hokage sighed, the smile slowly slipping from his face. No, Itachi-kun, you will not be detained. The Hokage proceeded to quickly summarize what Fugaku had done, how the Uchiha had rebelled, and the actions taken afterward. I see. What of my mother and Sasuke? They are currently residing in the Aburame compound. You are welcome to join them when our business here is concluded. The Hokage said. What is our business then? I'm sure you did not need to inform me of these events personally, Hokage-sama, Itachi said, his face still expressionless. For better or worse, Makoto is the new clan head. Unfortunately, despite her own innocence in the rebellion, she is tainted by the stigma of her marriage to Fugaku and other ninja, and even civilians will see her as at least partly guilty for your father's actions. If the Uchiha are to recover from Fugaku's lunacy, someone other than Makoto will need to lead the clan. I believe that someone is you, the Hokage stated, his eyes searching. Itachi closed his eyes for a long moment, assimilating this new information. The Hokage wanted him as a puppet. It seemed much as his father had. He could already guess the Hokage's plan. Itachi would be recruited into ANBU to prove his loyalty, and the Hokage would let it slip that Itachi had passed his personal evaluation and could be trusted with such a sensitive position, alleviating the other ninjas' concerns. His mother would become a powerless figurehead while he established his own reputation as a loyal ninja, and in a few years he would leave ANBU to assume his duties as the newest clan head of the Uchiha. He wouldn't have any real power, of course. The Uchiha had been removed from all their positions of power within Konoha, and it would be decades before the clan as a whole was truly trusted again. Itachi himself would be carefully watched by all sides, the Hokage's ninja monitoring him for any signs of rebelliousness, while the remaining Uchiha would likely view him as a traitor who sold out the clan for the Hokage's favor. It was an impossible position, thankless and demanding one that they would never have asked another child to take, but they were more than willing to ask him. But if he didn't accept, then Sasuke would suffer, either with the rest of the clan or worse as the next figurehead appointed to guide the Uchiha back into the fold. Itachi opened his eyes again, staring straight at the Hokage. He wasn't surprised to find that the Hokage's eyes wouldn't quite meet his own. What would you have me do? Itachi asked. Time skip Konoha training grounds. Kushu checked again to make sure no one was nearby to witness his experiments, then focused on the training post. Sticking out of the ground in front of him, his constant efforts over the past year in merging his Yuki and the human chakra his body contained had paid off, and he was able to create a stable mixture containing nearly any percentage of Yuki he desired at a moment's notice. From there he had swiftly mastered the leaf exercise and beyond, soon passing Ino's own progress in chakra control. She had been annoyed and redoubled her own efforts so she could keep up, but her happiness that he had overcome his difficulties with chakra control thanks to her advice, not Shizen's, she reminded him, was plain to see. Still, he didn't need any witnesses for this quite yet, so he had sought out an isolated training ground. He had acquired a fire jutsu, a low-powered simplistic variant of the Uchiha's infamous Grand Fireball technique, and was ready to determine just how much his Yuki would alter human techniques. Chakra theory stated that the hand signs helped ninja manipulate their chakra in the right pattern and prepare it for specific techniques, and doubled as a mental focus. Whatever they did for normal humans did not work for Kushu, perhaps because his Yuki overwhelmed the chakra in the body and did not allow it to react naturally. Still, he had been able to puzzle out what was supposed to happen and found that he could manipulate his Yuki in the proper way to mimic the effects of the hand signs, or so he thought anyway. He hadn't yet had the chance to observe for himself, thus his trip to the Training grounds. For his first experiment he decided to use the lowest concentration of Yuki he could and work his way up from there. A short string of hand signs later and he inhaled deeply before activating the technique and expelling the gathered air in a single burst. A small fireball flew from his mouth towards the log but quickly destabilized and fizzled out completely a mere 10 feet away. Kushu blinked, trying to place the odd sensation he had felt. There was something. Shrugging, he shook the odd feeling off and refocused. Perhaps his human chakra was still too weak, or he hadn't used enough. It was his very first time using any human technique. After all, grinning, he prepared a much more Yuki-intensive batch of merged energy and began the technique again. If all he needed was more power, this should be more than sufficient. The fireball he expelled this time was easily 10 times the size of the previous, looking more like a strong example of the grand fireball technique than what should be its weaker counterpart. His eyes widened in delight and victory as the fire roared towards the training post and then began churning in midair. His expression faltered. That certainly wasn't what the technique was supposed to do. What the Kushu's eyes widened when streams of fire began pouring out of the fireball and rushing back towards him. Too late, he remembered where he had felt that sensation before and figured out what was happening. Well, shit, he said before the fire slammed into his body. Time skip Yamanaka residence. While he had quickly healed the burns and other damage caused by the fire, his clothing was a complete loss. The charred scraps that remained were wholly inadequate to cover him. It had taken him nearly 2 hours to make it back to the Yamanaka home unseen. He didn't want to explain just why he was running through Konoha naked, freshly clothed and bathed. He settled back into the library and started reviewing chakra theory again. He would need to find techniques that did not require chakra to sustain once they were launched. Water sounded good, at least for now, less likely to destroy his clothing and far easier to explain. Failing that, he could always focus on close-range attacks, although even those would be risky. Time skip Konoha training grounds. Itachi's fist lashed out, catching Naruto in the stomach and driving the air from his lungs. Even as Naruto folded over, the kunai clutched in the younger child's hand, drove upward and scored a hit, leaving a long shallow cut on Itachi's arm. They broke apart, Naruto quickly regaining his breath as he fell back into a ready stance. Itachi eyed the wound with a nod of approval. You are getting better. Still, you are too willing to accept damage in exchange for striking the opponent. Even with how quickly you heal, allowing the opponent to strike you at any time could prove disastrous. There is always the possibility their weapons are laced with poison or that they have a technique as dangerous as the Juken in their arsenal. Try again, this time while avoiding the blow. Naruto nodded silently. Itachi dashed forward again, his fist striking the air around Naruto as they resumed their battle. These training sessions had begun in part because the Hokage had deemed it useful for Itachi to be seen helping Konoha's little hero. Itachi was certain the Hokage also fully intended for Naruto to learn from these training sessions, and the boy had Itachi wondered if this almost impossibly fast progress was what people had seen in his younger days. Still, Itachi found himself enjoying these sessions on a personal level as well. Naruto did not fear him as the other children did, nor was he awed and humbled by his skill or disturbed by his quiet, calculating demeanor. There was an odd sort of respect between them, two people who would never be even remotely normal, who had found a kindred spirit. Itachi reflected on that thought for a moment, absent-mindedly deflecting Naruto's attack. Was it that Naruto could see Itachi for all that he was and didn't care? There was something to that, he concluded, but that was not the whole answer. Even Itachi's mother tried to ignore the fact that he had already grown more powerful than her, choosing to focus on their familial bond instead. It was comforting in some ways, but it felt like he was donning a mask whenever he stepped foot inside her house, like he had to hide part of himself in order to feel welcome. Sasuke was better in this regard, but the early adulation had slowly but surely turned into a one-sided rivalry. Following the fall of the Uchiha clan, Sasuke had still held out hope that Fugaku would acknowledge him, and the sudden loss of his father had hurt him deeply. Sasuke had eventually turned the pain of that loss into a determination to restore the Uchiha clan's honor, and Itachi's place in Sasuke's life had shifted from role model to measuring stick. It was ironic, Itachi mused. Fugaku really would have been proud of Sasuke now. Itachi stifled a hiss as the kunai scored a shallow cut along his ribs, instinctively kicking out and landing a solid hit that flung Naruto backwards several feet. He barely managed to alter the direction of the kick so that it didn't crush Naruto's windpipe, instead catching him across the chest. Naruto pulled himself to his feet, grinning widely even as he spat out a mouthful of blood. That was another oddity. Despite what their relative skill levels should be, Itachi had to consciously stop himself from reacting as if Naruto was a serious threat and striking fatal blows several times, he had barely stopped himself from snapping Naruto's neck or stabbing a kunai into vital organs. Further, he was certain that Naruto knew what he had been about to do, and the child just smiled that wide grin of his as if he found it all terribly amusing. "You shouldn't get distracted, Anbu-san," Naruto said mockingly. "It's always the insignificant ones who catch you." In the end, Itachi had that odd sense that Naruto was speaking from experience, even though that should be impossible. He knew that Naruto behaved differently in these sessions than he did in his other activities, but statements like that made his instincts scream at him even louder. It disturbed him that after years of observing Naruto he still couldn't pin down why he instinctively knew that Naruto was dangerous. Time skip: a small tavern in the land of water. They're trying to keep it quiet for the moment, but some of the 7 swordsmen have gone missing. Jiraiya groaned again. "Kami, what is going on?" in Kiri, he shook his head. "Is this like the old Mizukage? They just up and disappeared." "No, there was definitely a fight this time, and at least one of them was killed. Kisame Hoshigaki apparently did the deed from the rumors. I heard he's one of the ones who left, and he took his sword with him. Oh, that's gotta hurt." "Yeah, they've already dispatched several Hunter Nin squads after him." "What's the new Mizukage doing?" "She's the one who drove him off in the end. Apparently she may have killed or captured another of the defectors. The rumors are all over the place on that. The rumors also can't agree on who lived, who died, and who fled outside of Kisame." Jiraiya frowned thoughtfully. It was useful to hear about the unrest in Kiri, but he never liked working with such vague information. His informant brought up another topic: his new knowledge on Kiri. Exhausted for the moment, "Hey, did you hear about Sword and Hammer Wave?" "Yes, I know. Did you hear that they supposedly made off with most of Gado's fortune?" Jiraiya whistled appreciatively. "That's gotta be over 50 million Ryo, more than that if you believed Gado. However much it is, that's still some serious cash." "And speaking of cash," Jiraiya snorted, then reached into his pouch. Instead of money, however, he pulled out an orange book. "Is that?" "Yep, the latest in the series, first edition, hot off the presses, autographed by yours truly, of course. If you still want your money." "No, I mean such a collector's item should go to those who truly appreciate it. True fan of your genius such as myself." Jiraiya chuckled to himself as he left the tavern. That got him every time. ANBU archives. Itachi flipped to the beginning of Naruto's file again. With his recent promotion to ANBU captain, he had access to nearly all restricted files, which fortunately for him included the vast majority of the information available on Naruto Uzumaki. He had already read through the entire file 4 times, learning nothing truly new, but his instincts, those same instincts that insisted Naruto was dangerous, insisted that he held the answer in his hands. He skimmed through the file again. ANBU HQ at 1-week-old orphanage at 1 year, genius intellect, rapid learning, incredible test scores, attempted assassination, moved to Yamanaka household, Kumo incident. Other than the details on when and how the tailed beast's chakra had been used, he had already known all of this. What was he missing? "Captain, you pulling another all-nighter rabbit?" asked Itachi. Grunted his response, waving off his fellow ANBU distractedly as the other ninja departed. Itachi dropped the file to the table in disgust. He stood up and began to pace back and forth, his nerves jangling. Kami, he was so close. He could taste it, but the answer just refused to come. Perhaps if he looked at it from a different perspective, instead of beginning with Naruto and explaining the oddities, start with the oddities themselves. Naruto knew that clouded the issue, evoked an emotional response. The subject was highly intelligent for a child. The subject was unable to bond with peers for several years, but later easily formed powerful bonds with the children of ninja families. The subject dismisses personal injury as irrelevant. The subject is incredibly focused on learning, absorbs knowledge on any and all topics like a sponge, with a recent focus on the healing arts. The subject was capable of deliberate murderous intent. Before the age of 4, Itachi's breathing began to quicken. He was getting closer now. He could feel it. What other oddities did the subject demonstrate? The subject was used as the vessel for sealing a tailed beast, a 9-tailed beast specifically. The tailed beast's chakra is constantly circulating throughout the subject's body. However, that was assumed to be no explanations. Just list. Itachi had stopped moving now, his fists rapidly clenching and unclenching and his body trembling. The subject has only shown external evidence of the presence of the tailed beast sealed within him on 2 occasions. Once immediately after the sealing and once during the attempted assassination, but that was because no list. His breath was coming in gasps now, his eyes wide. He had unknowingly activated his Sharingan, the 3 tomo spinning wildly as they stared at nothing. He didn't even notice Rabbit returning to the room carrying a tray of snacks, intent on doing a small favor for the ANBU captain. He didn't hear the tray drop to the floor or Rabbit dash out of the room seeking a mezzanine to help the ANBU captain, who appeared to be having some sort of seizure. Itachi's mind continued to turn. A little more than a week later, the subject took similarly life-threatening wounds, but the tailed beast's chakra was not used. This needed to be explained. This was an oddity among oddities. Why was the chakra not used? Why a week before, but not then? The Hokage and the other ninja had been relieved at the change of course, but in there it was his body stilled and his breathing slowed as everything began to fall into place. A look of stunned admiration crossed his face at the sheer beauty of the answer. It was so obvious, so blindingly obvious, that he couldn't believe he hadn't seen it before, that no one had seen it before. As he began to laugh, a choked brittle sound that frightened Rabbit and the Mednin. As they entered the room, he realized that his prior ignorance was his own fault. He had forgotten the first lesson he ever learned, the single most important lesson of his entire life. He turned to look at Rabbit and the Mednin, a wide smile on his face. "Never trust your eyes," he said, and vanished.